Hello and welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, the 2023 Biennial Juried exhibition, juried by Dr. Melissa Crum, Yusuf Latif, and Jolene Powell. Today we are thrilled to present artist Michael W. High. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. Please feel free to utilize the chat function to ask questions, and we'll be sure to get to them during the Q&A portion of the hour. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth, so if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right, thanks all, and welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Michael High. I use the W because early in my career, there were lots of Michaels similar to High. It stands for Winston, in case you're wondering, because no one ever knows. It's always a W. I'm a full-time visual artist living in Chardon, which is in Geauga County, far away, but I'm a lifelong Ohioan. I was born in Mansfield, which is Richland County, and I got my bachelor's degree at Kent State University. This is me from my recent solo show at Tiffin University in Tiffin, Ohio. Great gallery. It's a beautiful spot. And these are two pieces that are sort of at different ends of the spectrum. The one that's on the left of your screen is one of my earliest pieces. And it's called Mother's Talk. And you'll find that my pieces tend to talk about experiences in my life. This is an experience that I had in early childhood, where my mother was a elementary school teacher, and in a small town, everybody knows everybody. And the school nurse mentioned something about me personally, because I went to class there as well. And it sort of began to affect things. I'm an openly queer artist, and part of that comes from situations like this where the nurse had told my mother, and I was in 5th grade, so I was very young, and that she felt that I was gay. And that can be a dangerous thing. Luckily, my mother processed it well, but she did talk about in her later years that whether to speak to my father about it, and my father was a little more authoritarian, and they weren't sure, how he would deal with it and everything. So luckily, she felt that I should come out at my own time, which was not until I was a sophomore in high school. So I still had a few years before I was very clear about what I was. So that has a lot of meaning to me. And the rabbit on the left is, of course, one of my images that carries through my work, which are rabbits. They're basically replacements for humans, because I feel that the message that I can give, especially as in the other one, a difficult message or a very highly personal message, works better if it is translated through something that isn't specifically human, and thus they're focusing more on the message and the storytelling and the narrative than necessarily trying to see my face in it, or or someone I know, or if I'm talking about somebody or something. So the rabbit is a self-portrait, and it's called The Artist. And as you see, there's a target on him, and I will discuss that in a little bit. So the basis for my work is the life around us. I tend to want to talk about the moments in between moments, So not the special times or the snapshots of life, but what happens in between, say, the decision and the conclusion, and capturing all the moments. And in here we see the three threads of characters that I use basically all my career. We have blackbirds, we have rabbits and hares, which people sometimes even call me the rabbit artist, and ethereal figures. And ethereal figures are what you would think would be humans, and they do represent the human condition. But usually you will find somewhere in the back of their heads that there's an opening, or they're made in a way to where you can see into them. So it's not a brain case as much as that's where the soul and the message comes out of. And almost all my figures have eyes that are slightly open, and the mouths are usually slightly open. And that's sort of, if you imagine yourself taking a picture of something and the camera slips, or the person moves, and you get the picture where their eyes aren't quite open and their mouth isn't shut or smiling. So it's the moment in between. Rabbits for me have a long and storied meaning. I had rabbits as a youth, but as we'll see in a minute, they go beyond that. To me, they represent me and the message I'm trying to get. They're my stand-in. And blackbirds are, to me, messengers or harbingers in my work. They can sometimes represent what I call fate, because I believe in fate. Not necessarily in a religious context, but in that the way nature, the universe, and science and everything works, things have a life beyond what we think. We think something's over, but maybe it's not really over. Maybe it goes on in a way that we just don't recognize or are sensitive to as humans. So they can be blackbirds, crows, ravens, starlings. They can have human faces, but the blackbirds are usually, they're like a secondary theme. So if they appear, there might be more than what you see or what the title is. Because my titles are made for me and my messaging, but I'm one of these people that I don't want to insert my view too much. If someone gets something else from my work, I appreciate that. And I want them to carry through with that. Because I've had conversations where, people are telling me about something they see, or does this mean this? And I'm like, well, it means that to you, and that's what's important, because I want the emotional response. I'm a storyteller and I do narratives. They're personal, but I want it to be accepting of everyone. So that's threats. Now here we have the crux of the rabbits. This is a book that was illustrated by Maurice Sendak, who did The Wild Things. So, you can imagine where it is. The story itself is something I read when I was 4. So also very early on. I, like all artists, I believe that, things carry with us all the way through. It's like I don't really talk about the book that much. Sometimes I can't even remember the name when someone asks me about it. But it affected me greatly. The gist of the story is this rabbit comes out of the woods. This young girl is looking for a present for her mother, and he takes her on a journey to find it, and it ends in he wants her to give her mom some red underpants that they found in the woods. And to me, that was kind of disturbing. It wasn't necessarily positive. And then that the rabbit had such a humanoid form, walked on two legs and everything. It fascinated and horrified me at the same time. And what that does, sometimes when you're 4, you don't remember anything, not even your best birthday present if somebody got you a pony. But this has stuck with me. I mean, I think about it literally. I'll be in the car and I think about him, a picture of him bringing out the underpants. It's scary. So here we see on the other two where it begins to translate into my work. The work in the middle is called Behind the Mask. And it's almost as if I transported what I got from the book into sculpture. It's holding a mask and it's a rabbit pretending to be a human, whereas the child is dressed as a rabbit, pretending to be a rabbit. And this is about how, to me, it's about how parents, that children play a role. And sometimes it's to please their parents, which is normal. I mean, it's their caregiver. And, it's your world and you don't want to disrupt it. But it's amazing how many masks, it's like when you run into people and they're like, oh, I never knew so-and-so did such and such or could ever do that. And that's what it's about. That adults have a different world that they live in, and the children are trying to emulate it as best as they know how through their experiences. But sometimes it's it's scary. And the far one on the right is my reliquary of fate. I have a series that I've done of reliquaries, based on, I guess, Catholicism or Renaissance and medieval reliquaries that hold special things. Some of them have nothing in the space. This one happens to have a orange globe, or what I call a light, or a soul, or it could be a special memory. But here again, I mix the human with the animal, so that it's not a specific thing, that the viewer does not necessarily look at that and go, oh, that's Jesus, or oh, that's Muhammad, or I'm not trying to be specific. I'm trying to take you to a place where you think about something. Texture is also very important in my work. It's actually one of the most important parts because of the way I construct my work. All these images to the right are either inspiration, paintings, things that I've done. This is my way of sketching. I don't necessarily sketch with pencil or pen and do line drawings or manifest my construction in a technical way that way. I jump off of it because I have a thought and I want to put it down in a usually 2D way, so that I can then transfer that into a 3D mode. The work in the middle is an early work. As you can see it between the two images, the one on the far right is a brand new piece that it's part of my black and white series that I've started, which none of that has ever been shown so far. So surprise. But the middle work, as you can see, I did everything in iron oxide or oxides in general, because I liked the metallic sheen that it made when you fire it. I fired a cone 6 and sometimes cone 10, usually in oxidation, which means there is oxygen present in the kiln. but sometimes in reduction, usually for the cone 10s, which is where the environment is starved of oxygen. So the same glaze or same chemical, in this case, iron oxide, would react differently, and you would get a different sheen and a different color. And it absorb. The thing I love about oxides is that they absorb into the surface and actually become an intrinsic part of the sculpture. So there, you could break it and you would still see some iron deep inside it. You can't let it go. It doesn't let go of it. But I stuck with monochromatics for a long time. And that's mostly because I wanted to highlight the text, because texture is very important to me. And I felt that if I started doing what I'd begun doing in the last few years, which is calling out areas with color, which actually didn't necessarily come from me. It came from people who appreciate my work saying, oh, well, what if you isolated this? Or what if the flower was this color? And, you know, I picked up on that. It's like, well, you know, yeah, let me try it. And I tried it and I liked it. I still like both, but I always want to experiment. I always expand. The similarity between the two is obvious, mostly through how the handling of the clay. But you know, to me, they're like two different thoughts, and I can carry them at the same time. So I love the exploration. This is on the far right is the painting. It's a rather large painting. It's, I believe, it's either 42 or 48 square, so it's large. Because I have a concept in my mind of paintings, or what I call my sketches, that correlate to the three-dimensional sculptures, and at some point maybe showing them together, so that the family of the idea comes together. I have yet to do that, but it's a reoccurring thought in my mind. But targeting, to me, as a queer person, is specifically about the unspoken biases in society. And that can even happen with people who consider themselves, you know, friendly or supportive. And the one in the middle is a hanging wall piece, which I don't do many, but I have done a few. And this is specifically me. You can sort of see it. You got the little chin, which I have a big chin. It has the rabbit motif, which is, you know, very me. And then there's the target. And targeting to me is just when you're, when marginalized or underrepresented groups are unknowingly or quietly discriminated against. So, but someone else can get something else. It can be an obvious target in terms of a shooting target. They were based on circus targets or fair targets in terms of their general structure, but their meaning is pretty specific, because living as a queer person, you see all the subtleties. It can be with people you love. It can be complete strangers in the grocery store. If there's a hint of it, you don't know what advantages a majority takes for granted. But you notice everything that you don't have. I mean, just in terms of with queer people, the idea of coming out. Now, I've spoken to others that I think it's important, but I think it's sort of a travesty, You never hear straight youth going to their parents, sitting them down and telling them, say a boy, I'm going to go out with Susie, the girl down the street. That's just not a conversation they ever think to have or have to have. And then decide on what the judgment of, your parents is going to be. Will they, kick you out? It's something they never have to go through. I don't know why we have to go through it. It's a part of our culture. But to me, it's a subtlety of an example of something that most people don't find serious. They think, oh, it's good. It's good you came out. Okay, now we know, and things like that. But to me, at the same time, you're devaluing yourself. You've made yourself have to have their acceptance and their judgment on how you're living your life and who you love. And that their decision has to be important to your life. It's just a thing. And then I see Kim's on the line. She'll recognize the far piece. And that is one of the first pieces I began merging the human face with the animal body. And it's kind of for shock value, and it is a little shocking. A lot of what I do is about, relaying a message without it, without it being like writing on it. Message. It's I hope, a subtlety.
Mike,
What?
I'm going to interrupt you for just a moment. I want to just share with you that the images that are on your left are on the left for us as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good. So you see it as I see it. Thank goodness. Now this is about memory, and I pull a lot of memory. In fact, parts of press molds that I make to create decoration for my pieces come from, doorknobs and things like that from my ancestral homes and things like that. I'll take little trinkets and I'll work them in. The collage on the left is of my best friend Joan. And an important point to me is when I represent people who aren't me, they're usually people that I know or love. I don't necessarily work from models or represent models. So if I'm doing a person, that is from another culture or something, I want to have a personal connection to them. I don't want to just represent them. I want it to be someone I'm representing and their story works into it. So this is my best friend, Joan, from high school. And we went to a predominantly white middle-class high school in Mansfield at the time. A part of that was equalizing the ratio of ethnicity in school. And so Joan was somebody I met when I was a sophomore in high school. And we became really good friends. I introduced her to my friends. She introduced me to her friends, and we became a big friend group. And it was great. It was, my family for that time. And Joan and I just had a special connection. We were best friends. And she went on to get her master's degree in entomology. And by doing that, she joined the Army, or ROTC, and then had an obligation of, I think, 4 years afterwards. And during that 4 years was the first Gulf War. And her specialty was venoms and poisons, which you wouldn't think an entomologist would be useful, but because of the speciality, she was not allowed to communicate to me or her family exactly what she was doing over there. And everything I got from her was, oh, it's blasé. We play soccer and do stuff. And but from it, she came back with PTSD, which she had hid for a good decade. And so it was a private struggle. So even I knew changes, but I didn't know why. And she wouldn't tell me. And by this time, I was still living up here, and she was in Atlanta at the CDC. And so, we only saw each other physically a couple times a year. But she, it was hard for me. She eventually succumbed to it by her own hand. So it was a private struggle that ended in a private tragedy. And it affected me a lot because you become like, we were in our early 20s. And, the struggle when you're working on your career, and she was working on her career, and family and obligations, and meeting people, there wasn't time, or you don't think there's time to invest yourself as much as you probably should and reach out. So anyway, so this is her. And as you can see, I through my probably grief and guilt, I have sort of made her an icon in my work. And I always present her in a flattering light, and in a way that is serene and peaceful, which is what I hope she gained from all that occurred, and the aftermath. The piece in the middle is also her. And she's with a scarlet rabbit, and that represents me. So she's consoling me, or I do hope so. And she's in a more classical sort of Greek Roman position to elevate her to that status, at least within my life. The piece on the far right is is about the yellow bird. And here the bird is different than black because I started integrating human faces into it. But it's the same. The bird is the messenger, and this is one of the reliquaries. And it's telling a story and letting the person or their life know what is to come, what is to expect. Anyway. And here's where animals. What do animals represent in my work? There are a lot of things. They're ghosts. They're messengers, as I've said. They talk about difficult subjects in a way that the viewer, who is human, can accept in a different way, because it's not them. They don't have to put themselves in that situation. They don't necessarily have to make a value judgment about what I'm talking about. And here we have an example of another one of my ways of sketching, which I guess is line, but it's all acrylic, and it's sort of large. And then the piece in the middle is what came of it. And then of course, this is one of the earliest rabbits, where I was working out my construction, which is I form hollow, and I use pieces to create form. So it's not a piece I made and then carved into. I apply layer upon layer until I build a form. And if you were to look at certain sections or isolate certain sections, you'd be like, what is this? But you take the piece as a whole, you put some ears on it, it reads as a rabbit. So my work is about spontaneity and the process. I do the process very quickly. I do it very wet, which is not how it's more like the abstract expressionists who worked in clay. And, they came after the painters. They thought, oh, well, if the painters can do it, I can translate this to ceramics. And they maintained, usually, at least for a while, the traditional forms of pottery, bottles and objects like that. But eventually it became into just construction. And I take that back just a little bit, and I do the abstraction, but I make it representational. And so that bits and pieces, like a nose is just a torn piece of clay. But if it's on something that you read as a face, then it's a face. And this is culture, and this is usually specific to my life. The painting on the side is called Sucker Punch, and deals with also a very troubling youthful thing, was domestic violence. And where the eye is, I've torn away down to the bare cardboard. So I've destructed the piece to show that. And it's about how domestic violence comes sometimes out of the blue, or what seems to be to the victim out of the blue. But usually there are signs beforehand. And that relates to my childhood. And this is when I began doing heavy patterning, mono printing, and wood block printing, that I've now begun to translate through handwork into my clay work. The piece in the middle is a discussion on growing up in the 80s as a young gay man, and the AIDS epidemic. And, where you're young and you fall in love a lot or easily with many people, trying to work out where you belong or who you love. And the overlying fear that intimacy has a chance at any point of becoming death, or at least a severe disease that you will live with for the rest of your life. And then the piece on the far right has to do with a few friends of mine and some students. It's called Torn in Two. You can see the colors vary from side to side. There's the blackbird who's whispering of the future and what the person is doing. And it's about duality. In this case, it was specifically about gender duality, and people who have to deal with that. It's not my personal story, but it's a few close friends. And, I found that though they are LGBTQ included in the group, in the marginalized group, that their journey is far different than mine, even the traumatic parts. And I wanted to work through that in 3 dimensions. Now we get to the piece that is in the 2023 Biennial Juried exhibit at the Rife Gallery. It's a beautiful piece, and it is the first piece where I integrated underglaze decoration on, in this case, white or slipped white clay, and wanted to treat it as a fabric, because I've always dealt in textile, painted textile, manipulated and sewn. I don't call myself a textile artist because all my textile artist friends would punch me because I'm, I just experiment in it. I'll grab onto anything and try it because it's just the creative process inside. But this is a conversation, and this is the basis of it. But if you read the last line where I called about how clothing is used to identify groups or cultures, and in that way can be used to isolate or target or stigmatize people. And that's what it's about. It's kind of based, it's also my friend Joan as well. She was a quilter. So she and her family used to sit around on Sunday after church at their dining room table and quilt. And they never gave their quilts away, not even to me. And it was just something they did as a family group. And I always thought that was really cool. And she and I had talked about, when you're in a predominantly white community and you don't have a lot of people to talk about heritage and things like that. And we always would talk about each of our heritages, which were different. We came upon mudcloth, and I loved mudcloth. I saw it somewhere in a thrift store, I believe. And since then, talking about it with her and the meaning it has for her, or did have for her, has always made me look into it. How certain colors are reserved for royalty, certain colors can't be used by these people, certain patterns identify tribes or groups. Patterns of carpets are made by different, Middle Eastern tribes, and the others don't do that. That's something that one of the others does. So it's one of those things that since we've had clothing, it's been important, but we don't necessarily view it as important. But it is a thread that carries through all of society. This is my process of creation. And I'm not watching the clock, and I have a tendency to tell stories. This is how I finish slabs. My slabs are not made on slab rollers, though that would be easy and very efficient. But why do that when you can do it the hard way? I get different thicknesses by taking wet clay or damp clay, basically clay straight after you buy it, and smearing it on wood, which then the wood will slightly absorb the moisture between the clay and the wood, and will make it easy to release. And you also get the texturing of the wood impregnated into the slab. I make little slabs, big slabs, thin slabs, thick slabs. I make them all this way, which is not typical. And I'm sure that any teachers watching now are rolling over in their grave. But it's part of me wanting to touch the material, because that's what I get out of clay. That's why I do clay. That's why I enjoy it more than painting or textiles or anything. The tangency and the feel that I'm probably touching a dinosaur, and or even earlier. It comes from the earth. It's processed for our ease, but in the old times, it wasn't processed that much. And it's just amazing that this earth can be transformed into a narrative. It has its own life, it has its own history, and I make it into my own history. And one day, it will probably crumble and turn back into the other thing. So the middle one's a finished slab. I also sometimes will have to scrape them off the board, but they basically come off in big sheets on their own, just through the transference of the moisture. It's like using plaster, the same premise. It just takes a little moisture and then that makes it release. And then sometimes I smooth them out with a thing. Here's how thin or thick. In the middle is my favorite tool, which is also kind of simple and ordinary. It's bamboo skewers, where there are needle tools for ceramic artists that come in all the entry packs, and it's what students use to scratch, cut, and everything. And I do the same thing with bamboo. And what I like is that it's a grass, it's natural, and it's big, and I can use both ends. I can point or I can poke. And here on the edge is me slipping and scoring with my little bamboo tool. So I almost, and this is sad to say, exclusive of press molds, this is the tool I use to create just about everything. And here's the other part that I do that's a little different than most sculptors or potters, certainly, is I don't use a lot of slip. I will for larger, heavier pieces, but I don't necessarily slip and score. And this is controversial, so I don't, ask your teacher. But I take my thin pieces and layer them usually into thicker slabs. And I do this I have a fine mist sprayer. I spray them. I use clay that is basically equal moisture. So I work very quickly and wet. Most of my large sculptures of at least up to 28 inches I will not take more than 8 hours on them. And it will have to be in a day. And that's the spontaneity of what I expect of myself. That's not normal. People wrap and put them away and can work on them for weeks and weeks and weeks, which is all very possible and perfectly great. But inside of me, I have an anxiousness to create it. And the idea has to come out and has to come out quickly. So it's a peculiarity to me. So I spray them. The middle one is you can use a brush. I use my fingers, and sometimes I don't use it at all. Sometimes I will, as in the right side, I will just place one piece and slap it over the other. And I don't have a lot of air bubbles or anything because I'm basically hurling it onto the other piece. So it's forcing the air out. And so what I like about it is I create layers. And to me, thin layers upon thin layers that make up just like, to me, one flat surface I like the idea of, and this will sound odd, desiccated mummies and how the skin becomes almost paper-like and separates. So that's what I'm trying to mimic. Here is the idea of how I construct large quickly and light enough not to have gravity make it all fall down 10 minutes after I walk away from it. It's basically an engineering idea of buttressing. So I do clay buttresses. And on your right, you see where thin pieces are backed by other pieces that build on top of other pieces. So I've created from basic core, hollow core, I have built out a lot, but there's airspace in there so that it dries properly. It will fire properly and not explode. It has the ability to hold up. It enables finer, thinner pieces to be able to be touched in greenware and bisque and even in the final firing. So they look very delicate and people are very scared to pick up my work and move it around. Literally everywhere I go. And usually I do it because I build in a place, usually at the waist, where it can be picked up. It's ergonomically, but it's still thin, and this is how I get around it. It's, you know, an old Renaissance technique. So I didn't invent anything. So I don't claim to be, I just applied architecture to the clay, and not in a literal, look, this looks like a building, but in how it's constructed. Now we're going to go through a piece that I created for you guys to see the different steps. So that's just a hollow tube that I began pressing and pushing and molding into a human form, or at least how it reads to you. The middle is where I began to apply the buttresses to give myself some, to make it larger. But if I were to use heavy slabs, it would be firm and perfectly usable, but it would become heavy. And I like, in the end, I keep some of the openness. So not all of my pieces are joined together into a flat. I rip things apart, and I want you to be able to see through and to have an airy sort of wind look. Here's further buttresses, and then I start to cover some of the structure with thinner pieces that are usually backed. And then I start to apply these. This is where my press molds, all my press molds are either things having to do with my life, corrugated cardboard, because I just love that texture. I love the way it works and looks. The small round things are a press mold I made of a 19th century doorknob, also related to my past. So my past is on view for anyone who looks at it all the time. The final one is you'll see in the front right part is that's me getting the head shape ready to sculpt on its own. Here's my press molds. Now I make my own press molds not out of plaster. I make them out of bisque clay. So you just take wet clay, a big chunk, fairly thick, although this one isn't because I was making it really fast. And then I just press the piece into the surface, let it wait for a couple minutes until it releases, and then I work it out. As you can see, they're not like a two-part where they wrap around. They're pretty flat decorative things. But there's the 19th century doorknob, which relates to my grandmother. The middle one is my third favorite thing, which is a Starbucks, and I've saved a lot of these because they don't use them like this anymore. A Starbucks coffee sleeve. I used to go to Starbucks every day before I went to studio, and you know, I would save them even though they supposedly recycle them, and I just use them. You just smear it on there, wait a couple minutes, and peel them off, and you can use one of those things 20, 30 times. It's amazing, especially the old ones. Now they're really thin, and so I made a press molded one, so I would always have it. And then on the far right is my corrugated cardboard that, here again, I just pressed clay onto it, let it sit, peeled it off. Those are only bisque fired, so they absorb water to help release your clay when you press it in there. And as you can see on the doorknob or all of them, I like the rough edge. I could refine it, I could trim it out and smooth it out, but I usually choose not to. Now we're going to work on the head, and it's basically one of my thin slabs wrapped around into a tube. Then this is all hand worked. It's not press molded, although I have thought about that, making one and making a press mold out of it, so that it'd be like throwing cups and then making them that way. So here, just one pinch at the bottom, you already have the chin. As you can see, the top is open, and I may or may not close it at any point. Then it's a thumb and an index finger pinched, pulled to the middle, and then smeared down. And then I put a little round piece at the edge, and then I poke where the mouth will be. Here's farther along where I start to refine things. I still haven't placed it on the piece yet, in case I hate it and have to crush it and start over. Why waste the time? But here is where I cut the eyes. I refine the nose a little, and I add little pieces here and there to indicate chin or lips and things. Here I've placed it on, and I begin to refine it on the body itself. And then on the far right is when I add press molds. The hand mold is my G.I. Joe hand. So that's a reference to my childhood as well. My father didn't like boys to play with dolls, and he thought G.I. Joe was a doll. So my grandmother bought me one semester, and my brother and I both had one, and we had to keep them under our bed so my father didn't find them. So, yay. And this is when I add what I call doodads, which is not a technical term, so don't be asking any ceramicists, and those who are my critics were probably rolling in their grave that I use these terms. But this is to build up indications. Everything I do is an indication. Some things look literal, but if you were to analyze the nose, it's not really a fine art nose. If a marble sculptor looked at that, they'd be horrified. But I indicate hair, fabric, jewelry, as you can see. And it's just pieces, just ripped pieces, all by hand. I don't use shapes. I don't use patterns. It's all very intuitive because that's how I like it. Here's the final wet form. The middle is a side view, so where you can see how much I've left open, and so that you do see the structure. And then the final piece is waiting for what I'm doing next. Now I'm going to make pieces and decorate them with underglaze. So I have my thin pieces. Here are a few. I slather them with white slip and let the surface slightly dry. It doesn't dry, but I leave it to set up so that it doesn't smear too much into my underglazes. Here I'm using the underglazes, and I begin to use, this is where I will use pattern and brush. Most things are freehand, but I do use stencils just because I like the repetition, and it makes up for things. And then here are the final pieces on the far right. And then this is where the magic happens for me. This is when I take black and I introduce line to it, and I outline things and give it a very graphic quality. And these, as you can tell, are fairly wet. For people who work in clay, you can tell by how it looks. The rest of you have to take my word for it. They are so wet that they are moldable. And this is when I apply them to the final piece that you have. And I do tend to use slip in this case, only because the white pieces are usually heavy, and I'm running out of time. uh, so here is the final piece. There it is in the kiln, and there is the greenware piece. And I leave that as it is, and I will usually use iron oxide or glaze around it. And my final thoughts are, here's some of the work that I'm working in now. I've began incorporating textiles into my pieces as an intrinsic part of it. I have in the middle is collage, which I am working on collage as its own thing, not just a sketch or a color study for me. I have I've been working on cups, mostly for the retail market, because I don't sell much on retail, and people always want some small thing. And then the far right is the new line that I'm creating called the Black and White series. And it's predominantly black and white. But it does begin to integrate more pattern, and so it's everything I've learned before brought into that. So thank you for your time. I believe I've overrun my question and answer time, but if you have it.
Some time. We have some time for some questions.
Okay.
Is this your final slide? Do you have a slide after this?
This is my final slide.
Okay.
The only thing, yeah.
Well, one of the questions is, where are you located? So that's someone that came on a little bit later. And perhaps if you could share, do you have a website or Instagram? Where can people see your work?
My work is Facebook and Instagram only. I do not have a website. I've been chided for that for a lot. Because I don't sell much, it's not, it would just be a catalog, and that's what Instagram and Facebook can be for me, especially Instagram. It's at hi, H-I-G-H, all lowercase, hi, H-I-G-H dot Michael W at Instagram. And my Facebook is exactly the same, just at Facebook. Anyone can follow me. I try to post every week, and I post everything from the beginning to the end, and also where you can see my work, and any shows. I only do 1 to 2 shows where the work is available, and that's just my thing. Retail work can tend to take up a lot of time, and I'm sort of obsessed with exhibition work. I like juried shows because I like to decide whether what I'm doing and what I'm working on meets my peer structure, not beat it, because I don't beat anyone. I'm chasing myself. I don't chase other people. I don't want anyone to feel that, you know, I'm better than you or any of that. That's not me. This is all a personal journey for me, and getting in things or doing things or going to the next level is about me. It's about making myself accomplish something. So anyway,
so Michael, we chatted a bit, and I would love for you to share with the audience the importance of the learning space, so teaching and what you've received from educational structure, and paired into that, how you were able to break into what is very clearly your artistic voice through kind of a encouragement and support of some instructors.
Yeah, as you can all tell, I'm an older boy. I have considered myself only professional for the last decade, maybe a little longer. Prior to that, I considered myself a student. I had a career in art, but on the corporate level, which is a totally different headspace. And I did that for a long time when I was, before I was 40. Luckily, my husband, Dr. Michael Waterman, we reached a point where he knew I wasn't fulfilled as I was doing. And I wanted to find a creative space, and I didn't necessarily want to do it myself because I like commotion. I like young people around me and things like that. So I started back on my journey with clay after more than 10 years at Lakeland Community College in Kirtland, Ohio. And that I consider my community. I still go there. I'm a resident artist there. Uh, you know, Derek O'Brien's been wonderful to me. The person who started me saw I originally had gone in as a goldsmith, casting gold, and then I moved into bronze because at the time they had a bronze foundry. And I found that the finishing was too tedious for me. If you can have a staff, if you're like super special or very famous, you have staff to clean up all that stuff, all the spurs and everything. But I didn't, and so I had to do it, and it was not. So while I was making clay and wax molds for casting, the ceramics teacher at the time, Paul Fraser, he kept going, you should really go back to ceramics, because that seems to be where your heart is. And I'm like, yeah, but I had done that. I tried that in college, and now I was, trying to do something else. I thought there was a reason that I didn't pick it up after graduation, that I, wanted to be more in architecture and interior design. And so I took a night class when they had them, and it started me on my path. It was like, it was like a drug. It became all encompassing. And from that, my husband felt that, okay, you need to devote your whole time to this. And we were in a position where I could, and which not everyone can. And I understand that. I'm very lucky. But I have continued, through many years now at Lakeland, and it has everything I need. It has reduction gas kilns. It has oxidation kilns everywhere. We have a Raku, which I, helped Eric with, and and the people that there's a community there of because we take a lot of people from the community, people 65 and over can work there or do their work there for like $80, and that includes clay, and that's for a semester, which like 5-6 months, which is a great deal to the community because the community supports it through their taxes. And but so we have people there who have been there almost as long as I have. And then there's the students and the high school students who come in and out every semester, and I can give to them what I've learned, and I can also show them what it's like to take this to a different level. And we have had students who then go on to Cleveland Institute of Art, Kent State, who've only, we don't have a degree program at Lakeland. It's truly, just a minor. We're hoping for some nursing students to want to, not have to read a book for a while. But it's a beautiful community, and a shout out to them. And as I hear, Tri-C is the same way. Lorraine Community College, all the community colleges around here really feed the creative world. And I wholly, if you, even if you take it and you hate it, I want everyone to try it.
Perfect. So I think that's a really excellent place for us to leave off. Thank you again, Michael, for the generosity of your time and talent. And thank you all for joining us for this Artist Talk by Michael W. High as a part of our programming for the 2023 Biennial Juried Exhibition, Giving a special thank you to our jurors, Dr. Melissa Crum, Yusuf Latif, and Jolene Powell, and a big thank you to all of the participating artists, as well as the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the OAC, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.